Hello, welcome to this session on EACTP, a force for the future. The format will be three speakers: Adriaanse, Professor of Turnaround Management from Leiden University, myself as President of EACTP, and we will be moderated by John Willcock, the editor of Global Turnaround. John has over 20 years experience in, and probably one of the more experienced people in just what's going on in the world of turnaround. And John will be probing of where EACTP sits into the grand scheme of things.
Thank you very much, Alan, and welcome everybody. Yes, this is very interesting as a editor of a magazine like Global Turnaround. Talking particularly to Jan, I'd like to start with you before we get on to the details of the EACTP. It's just very interesting from a practitioner's point of view that you're a professor of it, that you're both a professor, an academic studying in a university in Leiden, and also you're a very much a real practitioner with your firm, doing things like investigations and acting as a trustee and so on. So I was wondering if you could just share with the audience a bit about your activities at Leiden University, how you got into it, and what being a professor of turnaround actually means.
It's an interesting question indeed, and I could talk for hours about it, I guess. But I think my fascination for companies in distress already started when I was a very young boy. Sometimes I joke to my students, there must be something happened during my childhood which went wrong, and this is why I got interested in distressed companies. But on a serious note, I started studying companies in distress around 20 years ago. Actually, when I was graduating from Leiden University as a student myself, and I was very much intrigued by a very big bankruptcy back in the days, which was the airplane manufacturer Fokker in the Netherlands. And they bankrupted, and I was very much interested in why such a big company could get into distress. So I started a PhD project and doing research within intensive care units of the four major big banks, the four major banks in the Netherlands. And I was really intrigued with questions like, why do companies become distressed? How do they, why do they enter, or are they being monitored by the intensive care units of their lenders? And I was really intrigued in the question, why does one company do a successful turnaround and the other is failing miserably? And this is what I've been doing, as I said, for 20 years, at the moment with a team of researchers with different backgrounds. So we have researchers with a more legal insolvency law background, but also financial specialists. But I also work with psychologists, which is very interesting in the context of turnaround, and basically studying how do stakeholders make decisions in stress situations, and also are they, for example, biased in their opinions and the way they make decisions due to psychological processes they are not aware of? And the answer is obviously yes, which is very interesting. And this is what I do. And I also torture my students with all kinds of articles, interesting stories, and things to study with regard to financial distress. And what I try to do is, I obviously, with young students, we teach them about entrepreneurship and about successful entrepreneurship, but we also want them to learn about more of the dark side of companies in distress, of companies in general. And this is why we teach turnaround management and bankruptcy law also as a course for bachelor and master students now. And I'm very excited, of course, with working together with EACTP on helping to further develop professional education in Europe and around the globe.
Thanks. That's so you're characterizing it as the dark side. I'm not sure Alan would agree with that, but fascinating. So that leads very nicely into, why do you think there is the need? Why should people watching this be interested in studying for and paying for a qualification like the EACTP?
I think there are several reasons. One reason, was already mentioned by Alan, is that I think for professional, for a profession in general, it's very important to keep on learning. I can see it in lots of industries and lots of professions, is that lifelong learning is the key. What I learned at 20 years ago in university is well, it's still relevant, but times are changing, industries are changing, we have technological developments, all kinds of business model changes. So it's very important for professionals to keep on learning. So I think this is a good reason. Other reason sounds a bit more defensive, I guess, but is that I think that our profession, the turnaround profession, is also under supervision of authorities. For example, in the Netherlands, there is lots of, and I think it's the same in the UK, and it will probably be in other countries, is that the authorities, the regulatory authorities, they're really interested in how, for example, banks, lenders work together with companies in distress, and they want to know how people operate in such a situation. It also has to do with kind of the negative stories of the way banks behaved during the 2008 crisis with regard to their clients. So building a profession with certifications and kind of a breed of people who acknowledge the fact that you have to operate in an ethical way, that you're being properly trained, that you have a peer group you work with, and it's very important for the standards, and also I think for the kind of the image, the whole way the society looks at a profession. And I think that's one of the reasons why it's important to establish certifications.
That's very interesting. So, Alan, image in society. It goes without saying, a lot of people have a very negative image of insolvency practitioners for the simple reason they're the people who go in and shut things down and sack people and all the rest of it. What do you think the image of turnaround practitioners is in society, and how could EACTP help there?
Well, that's a very interesting point. I think that it's not enough is known about exactly how skilled and how professional you need to be a, let's call it a CRO or a CTP, to understand, as Jan calls it, the dark side. I don't think it really is the dark side. I think, from my experience, is that if you haven't been on the debtor side, if you haven't actually been on the company side and been in those situations, you don't really quite understand how management think and how management react. And I think that's very important. So in terms of, answering your question directly, I think there's a lot of misunderstanding. I think there's to an extent that's self-inflicted, because a lot of people call themselves turnaround practitioners who are not really broadly based enough. There are people who come from a single discipline, either finance, or some have come from accounting. But nobody has actually had that, or very few people have had that total broad base. And what we are trying to do is to get it through to build up within governments and in the whole community, just how broadly based this program is, and how it can actually act as in stakeholder management as an independent force, someone who actually looks after or is conscious of all the stakeholders' needs, desires, fears, so that can actually credibly manage that process, that stakeholder management process. I think that if I go back 20 years ago, or when I first came into this profession here in the UK, people, or in Europe, people didn't understand CTP or CROs at all. It quickly took on, but it seems to have stalled a little bit after 2008. And I think that one of the reasons for that was that turnaround managers were probably installed at the insistence of the bank. And after 2008, many banks got rid of their workout departments because they thought it was easier to sell the debt than go through all the pain and all the abuse that got thrown at them after the 2008 crisis. So then there was a little gap, and if the creditors weren't appointing a CRO to help, and even if the creditors were appointing a CRO, that CRO might feel that he actually had an obligation to the creditor who had appointed him, because that was his referral source. So I didn't think that was totally independent. But how do you get through to get this profession understood into the debtor community? And so where you are still at the moment is that companies go too far into the process. As Jan alluded to, why do some companies turn around successfully? I think answering it as in a rather simplistic way, it is because they probably addressed the problem earlier and more objectively, and may actually begin to seek a more objective advice. Because if you just go to a professional advisor who is also an insolvency practitioner, you put yourself into a rather invidious situation, because that advisor has to make that decision: is, are you insolvent or are you not insolvent? And that is not a bright line definition. I think, Jan, we all know that it's much more nuanced than that. And if you are an insolvency, and there's risk involved, because a turnaround manager is a shadow director. He has all the responsibilities and risks of any director. So if you are a professional advisor and you have got, you're a turnaround or advisor and the other, your insolvency. I mean, human nature is such that sometimes there's less risk in advising your client to go into insolvency. And I would cynically say also it's easier to collect the fee, but that is a little bit a bit of cynicism there. Because when you're looking to get a mandate with a company that's in distress, their funds are stretched, and you have to recognise that in the process. So where are we in the development? Well, I think we're a little more respected than we were, and in the USA, the profession is highly respected, and a lot of bankruptcy judges love to see a CTP appointed by the debtor, because that gives them confidence that the company is being properly advised for all its stakeholder responsibilities. We're not quite there yet in Europe, as I see it, and I think that this program with Leiden University, based upon a global standard, will actually help get more credibility and more recognition, which is why I'm so excited about teaming up with Leiden. And I would say it's taken me 15 years to get from when I first embarked upon this project to where we are now. So it's a very important moment, for me and for EACTP, and hopefully for the turnaround profession.
Yes, I think it's significant that you were talking, Alan, about how this whole program had its origins in the US. And I'd just like to look at the sort of contrast in business cultures and in the tools that we have to tackle turnaround and restructuring in the different geographies. Last month in Global Turnaround, for instance, we ran a story about a very dramatic contrast between the incredible level of business in the US at the moment, Chapter 11's bankruptcies of big companies, all the big practices very, very busy indeed by historic standards. And then you looked at the major jurisdictions in Europe, UK, Germany, France, relatively very quiet formal insolvencies and really pretty quiet restructurings as well. And I was interested in why that was. And a number of reasons were put forward. I mean, many American commentators have said, look, there was far more government supported business in Europe during the COVID crisis than there has been in the US. But I was just wondering, Jan, what do you think about does this show anything about the difference between particularly the stigma of using Chapter 11 in the US? It's just a turnaround business tool. It's not anything disgraceful. Whereas in Europe now, still after all these developments that we've had, anything suggesting of bankruptcy is seen as liquidation and a disgrace and so on.
I do agree. I think the stigma on failure is perceived differently in the US as compared to Europe. Indeed, the whole business rescue culture in the US has evolved much earlier than I guess in Europe, and indeed I think government support somehow explains the fact that there are less restructurings, but still I think European companies hesitate to use these judicial reorganization instruments as compared to American companies. So yeah, I think it's kind of I think it's a cultural thing. More in general, I'm very much in favor, also based on empirical research, to try to avoid using Chapter 11-like procedures as much as possible. For me, it's always kind of the zone which you don't want to enter, but you can enter it if everything else has failed. And so my vision on turnaround management is trying to save the company, by strategic measures, operational measures, financial restructuring, trying to avoid the whole legal procedures as much as possible, and only use it when all other options are left. But I think my vision is really based on kind of a European view on why turnarounds fail or actually succeed, because in lots of countries in Europe, I guess, entering a judicial reorganization instrument is basically the first step into bankruptcy.
I agree with Jan. I think turnaround is a commercial process, and it's best used by doing it consensually as a commercial process against the threat of the worst case, which is insolvency. In the US, that's evolved over the years until it's become, John, quite normal, and people will go into it earlier. And from a management point of view, they're more comfortable with it because there is debtor in possession, which means that you are not going to go in with an immediate fear of losing your job, and that is a real issue in Europe, and I think particularly of the UK, is that when the insolvency practitioner comes in, very often they will take control of the whole business and senior management go. I've had that experience myself, which is why I became a fan of turnaround rather than insolvency, which is going back many, many years. And I cut my teeth in the early stage on Chapter 11s. And I know Chapter 11 is not perfect. If it gets drawn in, and as Jan said, you're better off trying to do it without getting into the legal side, because Chapter 11, the long drawn out process of plan of reorganization, can take a year to 18 months, and it can become a legal fee fest. And that is a valid criticism of Chapter 11. But I think that the US have taken steps to protect against that. There are small business turnaround procedures. There are Section 365 sales, etc. All of those, that's evolved over time. But fundamentally, to go back to your thing, it is because a US management team would not be afraid to engage and employ a US turnaround operation. And I know that our partners, our US partners, Conway McCollum, are very busy.
So that immediately then, Alan, I've got to ask you, and this is the sort of the $64,000 question, as it were. Do you think that the debtors in Europe will look at EACTP people and think these are friendly people, they're on our side, they're going to help us turn this around?
I'd like to think so, but I suspect there's some more steps to be taken, and a lot of it is the legislation framework in which we are operating, and there are some interesting changes going on across Europe. I've recently been doing some work on the French subsidiary, the UK subsidiary of a French company. And you know, John, because I have told you, probably told you about 6 years ago that the French system was the best system in Europe. It's complex, but to my mind, even to this day, I still think that is a very, very good system. Of course, it's hampered by plan social and the high costs of redundancy, but it is still a very, very good system. So you can go into mandat ad hoc, you can go into safeguard or conciliation, safeguard, and that's right. In the Netherlands, Jan, you're going into this WHOA system, and the jury's out there. But I think that with the scheme of arrangement type situation, that's going to encourage people to engage with turnaround practitioners. In the UK, we have SIGA, as you know, and in the early stages of discussing with the insolvency service, they did engage with EACTP, and my partner David sat upon one of the steering committees. And there was a big debate over whether the supervisor in the moratorium could be a insolvency practitioner or certified turnaround. And because we were not at that time exam-based, we didn't have that credibility. When the SIGA legislation was passed, just 2 or 3 months ago, the supervisor in the moratorium has to be an insolvency practitioner, which is just plain wrong. We should be allowed to be in that role, because we are effectively the CRO type. And if it is insolvent, we take the risk as well, and we will call in an insolvency practitioner. But here you've got a position. Now, it does actually lend itself to pre-planning with a certified turnaround practitioner. It lend itself that, and it may evolve that way. And I think the insolvency service gave themselves a little bit of an open sesame in saying that if they would open up that supervisor role to other people, that could be done by statutory instrument and didn't need another act of parliament. They've given themselves a little bit of wiggle room. Hopefully we can persuade them by the fact that we are now going to be an exam-based profession, that we have the credibility to become the supervisor in a moratorium under the SUGA thing. I still see this as a long-term program, John. I don't think the next couple of years are going to see see it totally resolved, but I would think that give ourselves that if we have this discussion in 10 years' time, and I don't think I'll be on the debate, I think we will have gone a lot further along. And just to add, Italy has Confederação Preventiva Branca. That's one where we CTPs can be very active. Also in Spain, with their 5.3 legislation, again, we can be active in there. So it's moving that way in the UK. Netherlands is almost certainly going to be a good field. France already is, although they don't need, we are not implanted in France, really. Italy, yes. Spain, yes. Germany, well, we'll wait that legislation. That would be a very interesting test case.
I think if you're waiting for the German legislation, you'll be waiting quite some time, from what I'm hearing from my German colleagues. Yeah, and just very briefly, you can give us a scoop, I think, from the Netherlands. What's the update on the new WOA legislation, the Dutch super scheme? Because I know it was slightly delayed by extra parliamentary scrutiny, but are there hopes that it will be enacted in October?
Well, the hopes there's still hope that it will be in October, but to be honest, I haven't heard lots about it for the past couple of weeks and months. But again, I think by the end of this year it will be, it will be there, and hopes are very high. To be honest, I'm a turnaround guy, just like you, so I'm always a bit reluctant with regard to seeing new legislation as kind of a panacea for all problems. But I do think it's a good instrument which can really help certain companies, certain problems. But in the end, for me, turnaround is always, it starts with is the company able to turn around itself and by making better products, position themselves better. So for me, let's say this the WHO legislation is an instrument, but it's which you can use, of a tool which you can use, should use, and can use next to the turnaround tools you're already using. So for me, it's not a panacea for all problems, but still, we are very excited in the Netherlands, and hopefully it can help save more businesses than we can save today.
Great. So as we come towards the end of our session, Jan, could you just sum up, make your pitch to people? Everybody's really busy. They're all dealing with this really worried stakeholders and debtors. Why should people devote time and money to this EACTP qualification?
Yeah, so in my opinion, people should do this because you're never too old to learn. The longer you practice, the more you maybe use kind of assumptions and you don't challenge yourself. So for me, it's also about challenging yourself to learn new stuff and to become a better professional. And I think it's also fun and good for yourself to study again, to do exams, and to, as I said, to become a better turnaround professional.
And Alan, I know you could talk for a long time about this, but just briefly to sum up, why should people study an EACTP qualification?
Well, I think there are two aspects to it, to go back to what Dan said. Number one is certification, and the other is education. Education is that we need a routine for young professionals to actually learn the whole spectrum of, that is finance, law, have a fundamental understanding of the law, so that they know when to call in the lawyer. We never do a turnaround without a lawyer. So I think you need to understand that. So yeah, that's the education side. A number of times I've been asked by young people, how do I become a turnaround manager? Well, this is the way you can do it. Certification, I think that this, the certification is a kite mark to all the stakeholders, that this person actually has done this before. and is independent and looking after all stakeholders' interests, not just one set of stakeholders' interests. So I think that's why it's very important, John.
Excellent. Well, thank you both very much indeed. And now, Alan, I know that you're going to be available for a question session during the actual conference.
Yes. So yes. So we can bring this to a conclusion now, and there will be a Q&A session, very brief Q&A session, which I will try and be very brief on. So
good luck, Alan.
If I might say, thank you very much, John. As usual, always good talking to you about this. I know you're so have so much depth of knowledge in what we're trying to do. And Jan, thank you very much for your. We look forward to getting this program absolutely off the ground into the next couple of months. Thank you very much.